If I ever see you using one of these styles, I'll fire you myself. I nearly got fired 3 times in my first 2 years, completely disregarded all of the rules and the processes and things like that big companies have. I was ranked last and she was. Your mom changed my life. Innovation is not an idea problem, it's a leadership problem. The greatest sign of leadership is saying, I don't know. I too am uncertain about what will happen in 5 years or 3 years. But what I am certain of is that we're going to figure this out, and here's how we're going to do it.
Good morning and welcome back to another episode of Limitless. Today we have with us Robyn Bolton. She's coming to us from Boston and she's with us to talk about innovation and business growth. But as all the shows on the Limitless podcast, we're definitely also going to go behind the scene. We're going to look into what is perhaps the dark side of leadership, or what is it where Robyn had to go through some challenging times. It's not only about success today, but it's also perhaps what nearly can break us, and perhaps those moments make us stronger. Robyn, a warm welcome to you. How are you?
I am good. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And we're just sharing before we logged on here. While it's morning for me, it's evening for you. And that's the beauty of the world we now find us in, Robyn.
Yes, the world is limitless. There are no boundaries. We can talk to people on the other side of the world. It's amazing.
That's fantastic. So before we get into the conversation and the deeper discussions, maybe you can just give a brief introduction of yourself to the leaders.
Sure, absolutely. So as you said, I live in Boston now, but I actually grew up in Cleveland, in Ohio, in the Midwest of the US, and went to school also in Ohio at a school called Miami University. Most people think that's in Florida. There is one in Florida, but the Miami in Ohio was first. And then after university, went to work for Procter & Gamble, and it's pure luck. We can talk about this more, but pure luck that when I got hired by P&G, it was a time when the company was investing in innovation, and I got assigned to an innovation team. So I am very proud of the fact that I got to be part of developing and launching Swiffer, which is now a $1 billion brand. Spent 3 years in Cincinnati, then moved down to Arkansas on P&G's Walmart sales team. That was a lot of fun. And then after a couple of years, I moved up to Boston, got my MBA at Harvard, went to work at Boston Consulting Group in Boston and Copenhagen, and then went to work for the firm that was founded by Clayton Christensen. So if you've heard of disruptive innovation, the innovator's dilemma, that's Clay. And worked with him for about 9 years, and then have since founded my own firm called Mile Zero.
Exciting, yeah. And it looks absolutely fantastic on LinkedIn, Robyn. Procter & Gamble, the Boston Consulting Group, and wow, it looks like you have a wonderful track record. And did I hear that you also mentioned Copenhagen there?
I did. I spent about 1.5 years in Copenhagen. I'm a quarter Danish and a quarter Swedish, and so I had the opportunity to kind of go back to my homeland, and so I had to take it.
Maybe we should switch this to Swedish then. I haven't lived in Sweden since the 90s myself, and I'm struggling to put two words together.
I only know how to say I love you because that's what my grandmother would say. So,
okay. Well, we take that off the record later then.
Yes.
All right, Robyn. So excellent profile, looks very strong. What is it that we cannot see if I'm looking at your LinkedIn? What was going through your life if we're looking at when you were coming in Procter & Gamble, getting that huge opportunity? What was happening to you at that time if we can go back in time?
It's funny because my professional story sounds, very nice and linear, and, one thing seamlessly leads to another. And I feel like it's all a lie. So many of the decisions I made were kind of non-decisions or absence of a decision. So, for example, when I was, getting ready, my last year at university, I wanted to go into advertising, and, I wanted to be in a more creative environment. And the only reason I interviewed with P&G was the school I went to was maybe 45 minutes, an hour away from Cincinnati. And so the business school constantly held P&G up as the most perfect institution that has ever existed on the face of the earth. And I have a little bit of a rebellious anti-authority streak. And I was like, that's just not possible. Like, nothing can be perfect. There's no way a company is this perfect. And so when I was invited to interview, I did it with the intent of getting an offer and turning it down to show them they aren't perfect. I mean, just the arrogance, the naivety of youth, but I was like so committed that they're not perfect, and someone has to show them that. And so when I did get an offer, I was comparing that with offers in advertising, and I'll tell you, when you're looking at P&G's offer that paid twice as much as advertising in a city that costs half as much as Chicago or New York to live in, pretty quickly, like my practical side took over. And so, okay, practical, took the P&G offer, and it's like, well, I'll go into advertising as my next job. And, again, with this kind of rebellious anti-authority streak, it really was luck, divine intervention, whatever you want to say, that I was put on an innovation team. And so I vividly remember my first week on the job, my boss's boss's boss called me into his office. And this was back in the late 20th century, the late 1900s, and we still sent memos around. And he showed me this 3-inch binder of approved memo styles at P&G. And he said, if I ever see you using one of these styles, I'll fire you myself. And I was like, oh, this is a place I like. So that was kind of a non-decision. I got into consulting because there weren't any jobs that I found interesting after business school. I'm like, oh, well, consulting is just going to business school and getting paid for it. So I'll just sample things until I find what I like. And many years later, I'm still in consulting. So most of it was just kind of process of elimination versus this very hard and fast goal of this is what I'm shooting for.
Yeah, very, very fascinating. And thank you for sharing that, Robyn. But at least you were in brand management, right? So it's not too far away from advertising, is it? If you put brand management and innovation together, or is that what it felt like as well, or?
Yeah, it felt incredibly creative, and I got to sit kind of on the other side of the ad agencies. They would present the creative, and I would get to comment on it. But what I really loved, and the reason I'm still in innovation, is because there was so much freedom and risk, but with a safety net. So I probably nearly got fired 3 times in my first 2 years because, again, the powers that be were like, treat this like you own it, treat this like your business. I was like, okay, I will. And then completely disregarded all of the rules and the processes and things like that big companies have. And eventually someone would come up and be like, oh, shake their finger at me. You broke the rules. And be like, yeah, but who cares? Like, the rules are the rules. We made them. You make the rules, you can break the rules, which, they don't exactly expect to hear from someone new into P&G.
Yeah, well, very brave of you, and you lasted for quite some while, and you managed to move forward. So kudos to you. And if I could ask you, Robyn, if you could turn back the clock now, it's end of the 90s. You're coming out of university and so on, and you had the same choice between Procter & Gamble or an advertising agency. What would you have picked then?
I would still make the same choice, provided that I'm still lucky in kind of how it plays out. Had I been put onto an existing brand, I don't know that I would have had as much fun, would have taken as many risks, would have learned as much as I did, in that innovation space where we were really, again, empowered and encouraged to take risks and to learn.
Yeah, it sounds like a good decision. And the advertising agencies are not doing so well today, so it might have been a good move to go into consulting.
I know. It all works out in the end, I think.
Yeah, fantastic. And what would you say that was some of your biggest learnings? Sometimes we learn things the hard way. I had my setbacks in life. I've been terminated a few times. Sometimes for not getting along with bosses, other times mergers and acquisitions. But it didn't matter. Every time it just hit me really hard. And if you think about your career and moves that you've done, what were perhaps the biggest learnings you take with you? And maybe there's something you can share that can benefit some of the listeners.
Yeah, so there are 2 that really come to mind. One was after I'd been at P&G a while, kind of after your second year as an assistant brand manager, second or third year, you usually got promoted to brand manager. And it was a time when P&G was going through a rough patch financially. And so for the first time, they decided to rank everyone kind of in my starting class, in my tenure. And, rank us 1 to, there was 12 of us, and then just go down the list. And I was ranked last, and I couldn't understand it. And eventually, through talking to people, I learned that they basically looked at how many cases of product you could claim that you had shipped, that your initiatives had sold. And I was working on a brand that hadn't launched yet. So it's like, of course I have shipped no product. Like, of course I have no revenue to my name. I'm working on a new product. And they're like, yeah, oh, well, sorry. And I was just so infuriated by the unfairness of that. And again, it at that point I was like, this is ridiculous. I'm out. And I was, again, it kind of luck showed up in that one of the guys, the senior guy I'd worked with who was in sales, he had just been assigned to the Walmart team. And he's like, hey, I need a brand manager down there. Do you want to come down? And so I ended up buying a one-way ticket to Arkansas and, had a great year and a half in Arkansas. Got promoted way before I should have, according to this list. But I would never have taken the opportunity in Arkansas if I were higher on the list and I was going to go into kind of a more traditional brand manager role. So that's one thing, finding out that you're the least amongst your peers was really, really, really tough and devastating. Another kind of big lesson, big moment came after P&G, after graduating from business school. About a month and a half after graduation, my mom passed away very, very suddenly. And she was a nursery school teacher. She was like the Pied Piper. It was amazing. Like literally children would gravitate to her. We'd walk through the mall and you'd see kids, she taught 3 and 4-year-olds, let go of their parents' hands and gravitate to her, and complete strangers. It was wild. I do not have that gene at all. I like, oh, kids are sticky and messy and please don't touch me. So at her funeral, her calling hours, there's just a line out the door of kids. Parents had brought them to say goodbye to Miss Loretta. And there was one kid who she's probably 8, maybe, and she was a wreck. Like she was the biggest mess of anybody I saw that week. And I kind of felt compelled to go over to me because it didn't look like there were any parents or adults near her. And, it's like, hey, are you okay? How are you doing? And through her sobs, she's like, your mom changed my life. And my thought is, you're 8. There's not a lot of life to change. And then she told me the story of how when she was 4, she was in my mom's class and she was having a really hard time at school. She was having a really hard time making friends. And so her parents were going to not send her to kind of elementary school. They were going to homeschool her, but she loved to sing. And my mom would sing with her. And to be very clear, my mom could not carry a tune in a bucket. I think that is genetic. None of us can sing. I was excused for mandatory choir in elementary school. Like it's that bad. But my mom would sing with her. And now this girl talked about how she's in school and she has friends and she's in the choir and how happy she is with her life. And here I was, fresh out of Harvard Business School, listening to this little girl and realizing like, that's what success is. Success isn't all the things they talk about and celebrate, in MBA programs. Success is a little girl saying, you changed my life. Even, doing something small and potentially embarrassing, like singing with a child. And it just completely, in such a short period of time, shifted what I viewed as success and kind of how I measured my life and thought about, just how I showed up in the world. And so that, at a very sad time, it was an incredible gift to kind of get that reframing.
Wow, Robyn, first of all, I'm sorry for your loss. And as you were sharing that, I got goosebumps here because I couldn't even imagine a more beautiful legacy, right? And in the work we do on ourselves, finding our values, our life purpose, and so on. Sometimes we take us to our 80th birthday. Sometimes we are taken to our own funeral to think through what would we like people who are attending our funeral to say about us. And I couldn't imagine anything more beautiful than someone to say about your mom in this case than a little girl coming up to saying that's really, really something. Robyn, how do you feel about that now, sharing that story?
I have goosebumps, and it's a bittersweet story because my mom always put herself down. It's like, oh, I'm not as smart as your father. I'm not as smart as you and your sister. oh, and just, oh, I'm just teaching kids. Oh, we're just finger painting. And she always put down the work she did. And I kind of wanted to go to the coffin and shake her and be like, do you see the impact you had? Like, how dare you put yourself down? You've changed all of these lives. And so it made me really proud of her. Makes me wish she was still around to touch lives, but so grateful to have had that moment to really kind of, I think about it probably every day of like, hey, am I living a life that honors that example?
Yeah, and listening to that, Robyn, I would say that your mom is still around. She's touching lives by you sharing her story. You're living her legacy now, and you're sharing that with others, which I think is very, very powerful and beautiful. And let me ask you then, based on the story you shared, it sounds like, you have a beautiful picture of your mom. And how does she live in you? How does that show up in your own values and in your own life these days?
Yeah. Probably one of the biggest reasons that I've stayed in consulting, which again was process of elimination, is that I love the service aspect of it. That I love being of service to others. And one of the things, I just love innovation because it is breaking the rules and challenging the status quo and questioning things. But what I found is that through the work that I do in that space, and by really focusing on being of service, that people kind of see potential that they had never seen before. And watching that moment happen in an individual, in a team, in an organization is just like, it's just the most beautiful moment. I had a client years ago say to me, working with you is like going to Oz. And at first, I'm like, oh, that's cool. And then I'm like, oh no, what if I'm the Wicked Witch? I need to clarify this. And so it's like, hey, what do you mean? Thanks, but what do you mean? And he's like, before everything was black and white, now I see everything in Technicolor. And I just thought, like, how incredible, how lucky I am to be part of kind of opening his eyes to all of the potential that he has and help him kind of start seeing the world in that way.
Yeah, that's very powerful, Robyn. And I know that you also do community service. Indeed, you spoke about being of service, and I find that the best dopamine kicks we ever can get is indeed being of service to others. And I know you do some work with WIN. I think they're called Women in Innovation. Maybe you can elaborate a little bit of the work that you do for your community there for women to have a seat at the table.
Yeah, so it's funny. One of my colleagues several years ago kind of asked, she's like, why are there so many more women than men in innovation? And it's like, well, I don't know if that's true, but I think it's because, as women, we see all the flaws. We don't have a vested interest in the status quo. We have a vested interest in making it better. And so, through the work that I do with WIN, through the work that I do with other organizations I'm a part of, it's really about kind of sharing my stories and giving the support and the advice that I was either fortunate enough to get from mentors or that I wish I had gotten. And, because so much of the advice that I got coming up in my career was about fitting a mold. And now being able to say, like, okay, yeah, you got to play the game, but you don't have to play it all the way. Like, don't try to be someone you're not. And, especially again, in the innovation space, you can be a little bit different. And that's a credibility marker. So don't shy away from who you are. And so that kind of mentorship, sponsorship is something I just warms my heart.
And if we're looking into a bit of innovation then, Robyn, if leaders want to innovate, and what are the things that otherwise gets in the way, let's say mentally or physically or even socially, what could be the blockers for them from being the best innovators, according to you?
Yeah, so I often say that innovation is not an idea problem, it's a leadership problem. And I have immense empathy for the leaders who are being asked to innovate and do something new, because it is inherently risky. It is riskier than doing what you've always done. And so, put myself in the shoes of, a BU president or a CEO, you just kind of look and say, all right, well, I have a budget. I have a certain amount of people. If I allocate one resource, whatever it is, to this thing that we always do, I know what return I'll get. I know when I'll get it. It's a sure thing. If I allocate it to innovation, to doing something new that creates value, I don't know if I'll get anything back. And even if I do get something back, I don't know when that will be. And so it is totally logical to take the sure bet, especially when you're measured and evaluated on what did you deliver this quarter? What did you deliver this year? And if you don't hit those numbers, you don't get your bonus, you maybe lose your job, social reputation, all that. So it is so absolutely logical to do what leaders often do, which is take the sure bet and focus on the existing core business. And so you really need kind of a level of, being irrational and illogical to place a riskier bet. And so much of that I see is really from leaders who are thinking about leaving a legacy, who are thinking about the long term, that they won't be around for whatever reason to enjoy, but kind of paving the way for that. And so you really got to dig deep and do something that on the surface doesn't look like it makes sense. But because you believe in the longer term, you believe in the legacy you want to leave, that's critically important as a first step.
Yeah, I really like that, Robyn. And I'm fully aligned with you. I believe that, we need to have a clear vision of what is the legacy we want to lead and then stick to that. And I know that you're also advocating, I saw in your articles and so on, that you're talking about that we live in this uncertain world and therefore leadership can't be uncertain. Maybe you can elaborate a little bit on that as well.
Yes. So it's funny. We live in this uncertain world and everyone is looking to leaders for certainty, for comfort, for guidance. And the leaders themselves are uncertain. And, I really, my advice is not bask in the uncertainty, embrace it. No, I don't like uncertainty. I hate it. I hate it. So let's figure out how to manage it. It's not going to go away. We can't eliminate it. So what tools can we use to manage it and to reduce the risk? How can we take little steps instead of taking big steps? How can we make little investments to learn instead of, spending millions of dollars to accomplish something? How can we even get creative, kind of think about what the world will look like in 10 years and all the different worlds it could be in 10 years, not because we're going to invest towards them, but so that we can kind of work backwards and say, well, then what would we need to do now to preserve our options and keep as many options open as possible? And, with leaders, everyone's looking to them for answers. And I think the greatest sign of leadership is saying, look, I don't know. I too am uncertain about what will happen in 5 years or 3 years. But what I am certain of is that we're going to figure this out and here's how we're going to do it. And I think people trust that level of honesty and will follow you step by step. They don't have to know for certain what the destination is. They just have to know there's a plan.
And if you're looking at the innovation leaders that you work with, when are they breaking down? What is it that makes them, not make the cut? Is it based on identity, fear, or internal breakdowns? So what is it that you see?
It's often internal breakdowns because they are, I'm biased, very special leaders who think in the long term, who are willing to take risks, who are willing to invest in legacies. And not everyone at leadership positions are like that. And what I often see happen is either you have an innovation leader who's just kind of all personality and, I'm the big thinker, I'm the next Steve Jobs. I mean, it is ego and big words and flash and they get a little bit of runway, but eventually they kind of take everybody off. And so they don't have the internal support when times get tough. So that's kind of one flavor where failure happens. The other is kind of much softer and quieter, in the sense that you have someone who isn't all flash, who really is a lot of substance, focused on legacy, focused on long term, and they haven't built the relationships with their peers to kind of bring their peers along the way so that their peers understand, hey, this is the vision we're going towards. This is why this is this vision. This is how what we're doing today advances our priorities today and sets us up for the long term. And they don't spend the time building that coalition so that when times get tough economically and budgets get cut, that everyone believes in the importance of the budget and the people doing the innovation work. And so they don't cut it because they've been brought in to believe in it.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your wisdom with us today, Robyn. And you're also an author. You've been writing about unlocking innovation. Perhaps you can share, is there some story from there or your favorite part of the book that you want to perhaps share with the listeners as a bit of a teaser today for them to pick up a copy?
Sure, yeah. So it was actually, as probably far too many things in my life are, it was born out of my frustration. Where, I've been in innovation for 30 years. It's been 30 years since, the innovator's dilemma was published and kind of corporate innovation became a thing. And the success rate hasn't changed. And I was like, this is the literal definition of insanity, that we've been doing the same thing for 30 years. We've been improving it, but nothing's changed. And why is that? And from my perspectives, from working with incredible innovation leaders at other companies, I realized that we've been focusing on all of the left brain stuff of innovation, all that businessy stuff of strategy and structure and process and governance and metrics. And that is all necessary, but it's not sufficient to move the needle. That you need to have what I called the ABCs of innovation. You need to have the architecture, all that left brain stuff, but you need to have the leadership behaviors, and you need to have a culture that supports innovation. And you have to be working on all three of these things at the same time. And the data shows that 90% of innovation teams are shut down within 3 years. So you only have 3 years to make a difference. So you're working on 3 different things at the same time, but in different ways over 3 years. So it's really, 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 really hard. And I wrote a book that is essentially meant to be the playbook for each of those things over each of the 3 years, kind of using stories of successful innovation leaders to illustrate the points.
Okay, well, thank you for sharing that, Robyn, and hopefully some of the listeners will pick up a copy as well. And any last message that you want to share with us today, Robyn, before we let you go when it comes to innovation?
I would say be brave and be humble. And yeah, if something scares you, as long as it's not really dangerous, if it just kind of gives you little butterflies, do it. Just give it a try.
Fantastic, Robyn. I will invite you to join me for one of the upcoming Ironman events. Does that give you butterflies?
that gives me pterodactyls.
Excellent. Okay. Well, thank you so much for having come on the show. We will share your LinkedIn page with all the listeners and also the information about your book and so on, Robyn. Thank you so much for coming on the Limitless show, and I wish you a great rest of the week. And thanks to all the listeners as well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.